Welcome to Actually You Can, the podcast that's all about empowering purpose-led professionals and entrepreneurs to uplevel their results in all areas of life. This episode is all about how you can develop long-term sustainable healthy eating habits. Joining us is James Kuhn, a nutrition expert who's helped countless people transform their diets, bodies, and lives. We discuss the concepts of rigid versus flexible eating and explore the psychological, social, and physiological factors that can impact your relationship with food. James also provides practical tips for setting up your environment for success and guides you on how to create a sustainable, healthy eating plan that's tailored to your lifestyle. So whether you're a seasoned health enthusiast or just starting on your journey, there's something for everyone in this podcast. Get ready to learn how to create long-term, sustainable, healthy eating habits that can feel easeful and empowering, because actually, you can. Hello, James, and welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here.
So before we dive in, please able to share a little bit about yourself and how you developed an interest in nutrition. I know you have a wide range of interests, including playing Vikings with your son, and probably something I'm really keen to dig into a little bit later, and that is how you're going with your goal to build a sushi stack of plates that's bigger than you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that too.
That's my main focus, actually. That's where the majority of my knowledge lies. So yeah, I guess a little bit about me. I am an online nutrition and training coach. These days, primarily working with time-poor professionals, helping them to obviously look and feel good while having very little time on their plates, which I feel like is more and more most adults these days. In terms of background, I guess I'm a registered nutritionist and sports nutritionist. I have a bachelor in exercise and coaching science as well. And I'm not sure if you want the background story about how I got into that.
I would love it.
Okay, cool. It's probably pretty similar to a lot of people, to be fair, in that I was very active from a young age. I played a lot of sports throughout my childhood, had a very healthy upbringing. Got to high school, things slowed down a bit, other interests came on board and stuff like that. And while I wouldn't say that I was overweight, I was definitely chubbier. And high school being high school, everyone's got one of these stories where there's some degree of I don't know if I thought of it as bullying at the time, but there was probably some degree of that, which I think, thinking back on it, probably impacted my direction in a lot of ways moving forward. So I had the high school years, which I think are tough for everyone, and then got to college. I went to a sports-related college, so I had access to a gym. Obviously, at that age, the opposite sex starts becoming kind of more of a focus point as well. And I was still playing sports. So you kind of have that combination of having access to a gym, thinking that, obviously the opposite sex is attracted to a certain look and things like that. And so I got into the gym pretty heavily, which then kicked off my interest in health, nutrition and stuff like that. Not in a healthy way, I should say, but reading men's health magazines, Muscle and Fitness and things like that, getting subscriptions and going down a deep rabbit hole, which, it started me in the right direction. It grew the passion, but it definitely was not good information that I was learning. And then from there, went to university. I did the Bachelor of Exercise and Coaching Science first. That was mainly just because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I knew that I liked exercise. So I was like, this seems like it makes sense. I thought, I'm going to finish my degree and I'm going to become a strength and conditioning coach for a professional football team, and life is going to be swell. And that did not happen. Basically, I finished uni. I was living by the P's get degrees kind of mantra. Came out, realized that any jobs in that area were pretty much unpaid jobs for the first 6 to 12 months. I would have to move to Queensland or New South Wales to start an internship and things like that. And I just wasn't willing to do it. So I PT'd for a while. My interest in nutrition continued to grow. So I went back to uni, did a nutrition degree, much different mindset at that point. Then, I worked at the Healthy Eating Hub for 3 years, then started my own business. That's the long, short story.
Wow, what a journey it took you to get to where you are here. And what stands out to me in hearing you share your story is it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your interest in nutrition perhaps came from an area more of pain than it was pleasure. Is that sort of about right? Yeah,
for sure. I think that pain obviously drove me to the gym and to caring about how I looked more, which, it definitely pushed me down that path. I think there are a lot of times between the age of like 18 to 23 where a lot of the behaviors probably are not what I would consider healthy behaviors at this point. But it was also one of those things where I started seeing results, both like physically, but also like I was saying, like not that I ever had a ton of attention, but I got attention from the opposite sex. So everything was like saying, you're doing the right thing here. You know, like my metrics for success were like, you know, being ticked off at that point. So it kept me going, which I can't be mad about now because obviously it's led me to where I'm at. But it was definitely not coming from a healthy place.
Yeah. And so what is that place now? What is your relationship with nutrition and training and your physical body? What does that look like now?
Wow, that's a tough question. What is that relationship? Look, I guess I would consider it healthy. Like I said, there was a lot of years where it wasn't, but I believe that in a lot of areas of life, the journey is kind of about sometimes moving between extremes and then finding that balancing point down the line. So going from one extreme to another and then learning the lessons along the way and gradually finding that happy place in the middle. I think I found that quicker than the majority of people based upon getting into that area of education and actually looking at the research and understanding, which helped a lot. So yeah, these days, what does it look like? It looks like basically, I guess it's hard to explain without going into detail. I'm sure we'll dive into that, but having a flexible approach where, you know, I know that if I am eating in line with my goals roughly 90% of the time in the grand scheme of things, you know, over years, that really that 10%, like I'm not going to be going far off. I'm not going to be, you know, becoming overweight or becoming unhealthy or anything like that. That's going to pretty much at least keep me where I'm at, which is what I'm happy with at the moment. And it allows me to focus my brain on, you know, other areas, business, family, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I really love how you said you looked at both extremes of things. It's the first thing that came to mind when you said that. It's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's like sit on the chair that's too big, too small, and then you find the one that's just right. It sounds like you went through that process. And as you said, probably quicker than most. Some people don't even get to that end journey. So I would love to dig into that in more detail as we go on too. But I know that your special interest and what you're an expert at, amongst other things, I have no doubt I would hate to face you in a game of trivia, but would love to dig into more about nutrition, specifically what you mean when we talk about developing healthy long-term relationship with food. You said you feel like you're in a healthy place at this stage. What does that look like and sort of what can it look like for someone else?
Yeah, so I guess just in regards to trivia, I'm actually not particularly good. I have like two strong points. Nutrition and fitness is one. That's where my knowledge is limited. I know my circle of competence there. I'm not bad at geography either, or maps of the world, weirdly.
What about Harry Potter? I heard you might be a Harry Potter fan.
Yeah, I'm pretty good on that front as well. Fantasy, Harry Potter, that kind of area. I know a bit there too. But yeah, in terms of healthy relationship with food. So I guess in a way, it's somewhat similar to any healthy relationship. Like you can think of it like with a person as well, that there probably needs to be some degree of balance there. You don't want it to be imbalanced, and there needs to be compromise to a certain degree as well. More specifically though, I think we need to look at it from like a biopsychosocial. I think that's the order that they go in. I think you've heard of this before. So that's how I would generally look at this in terms of the biopsychosocial model of health. So just for people at home, that's like considering biological health, social health, and psychological health all in kind of one model that we look at health. So rather than just focusing on the physiological needs, we also need to consider someone's psychological needs and their social needs as well. So when we're talking about nutrition, essentially that's what we're talking about, is that we're looking at, okay, well, what's going to keep us healthy and, you know, reduce the risk of disease in the future? From a social aspect, obviously we need to kind of have a nutrition approach that doesn't isolate us. So there needs to be the ability to be able to socialize with friends and family and have those important connections between them. And then from a psychological aspect, it's probably the hardest to explain, but also the one that I think people think about the most when they're talking about a healthy relationship with food. So I guess it's reducing risk of disordered eating patterns, not necessarily eating disorders, but just disordered eating patterns, which are really, really prominent in society. And I think most people probably aren't even aware that they're doing some of these things because it is so prevalent and it just seems like it's normal to a lot of people. So yeah, I guess with that, you know, one of the things that we talk about is reducing what we call like rigid restraint around diets or nutrition, which is essentially like the idea of looking at nutrition or diets in absolute terms, thinking about things in black and white, you're either on the diet or off the diet, things like that. So there's no wriggle room, essentially. If you go off whatever that plan is or whatever you consider to be the plan to any degree, then you've messed up and you might as well, eat another large pizza and get a McFlurry on the way home and you'll start again next week. But for the meantime, you're just going to make the most of this indiscretion. So that's definitely moving into that disordered eating pattern line. And even just talking about that there, you can see that what happens is people are overly rigid or restrictive. Something breaks that plan, or they see something as a perceived failure. They then overdo it, overindulge because they've messed up. And then they try and go, well, I messed up. I need to be better. I need to have more willpower, whatever it is. So they start again on Monday where they overly restrict or rigid. And then we go into this binge restrict type pattern that so many people fall into, which, ideally is not what we want. Yeah. Does that kind of give you a rough idea?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you touched on a really good point, and that's the rigidity aspect of it. I think it doesn't just stem from nutrition. It's sort of when you're trying to look to implement anything new. Sure, some sort of structure and discipline is useful to help you create a habit. But when it becomes limiting and rigid, I think that's when, and let me know if you get similar with your clients, but I feel like that's when it's almost our human nature to want to rebel against it. Like if you tell yourself, hey, I can't do this thing, all of a sudden you might never have thought about doing this thing before, but suddenly it's on your mind. You're like, until I tell myself I can't do it, now I can't stop thinking about it. Is that sort of what happens with nutrition in your clients as well?
Yeah, for sure. As soon as the thing is like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but as soon as something's rigid, it's fragile to a certain degree. You know what I mean? Like it's going to snap or break. There's no kind of movement there. So whenever you put those rigid rules on a diet, it leaves no area for kind of wriggle room. The alternative to this, and we actually know, like there's research looking at flexible and rigid restraint. Rigid restraint is specifically with nutrition. We know that it tends to lead to greater regain after loss, more struggles with kind of weight maintenance, more eating disorder symptoms, all of these kind of negative things compared to more flexible restraint, which is essentially the opposite of what we were talking about, which is having some wriggle room. And essentially it's just kind of like being able to have some cake at your nephew's party without feeling like you've messed up or losing the plot and going crazy about it. Understanding that you can have those things, in moderation and still move towards your goals and stuff like that. The other aspect that I forgot to talk about is also labeling of foods, which is a really big part. I think people under or discount the effect that labeling foods has. What I mean by that is like labeling foods as bad or dirty, fattening, things like that, which is kind of moralizing foods. It doesn't actually give us any information about the quality of the food or what's actually going on. It's just putting kind of these rules on it so that when you consume those foods in any context, because you call it bad or dirty, like of course you're going to feel bad consuming that food in that context. And so that again leads to that all or nothing mindset where you then feel like you've messed up and you end up overdoing it. So I guess the big thing that I reinforce to clients with this is that it's not the food itself that is the problem in these situations. It's your response and reaction. There's no issue unless you kind of make an issue after consuming it. Like if you consume it and then even if you overindulge and you eat too much, you kind of reflect on that and you go, yeah, I probably ate a little bit too much, but like I learned from this, I can kind of reflect on it and then I just get back on with it. And inevitably that ends up reducing fluctuations in intake over time and you still see better results. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely does. And so we talked about the rigidity of food and the labelings of foods. And I think when you mentioned the labeling of foods, something that I used to hear often in the circle I was in was, I'm going to have a cheat day or a cheat meal. And I'd love to hear more about that sort of concept of a cheat meal or a cheat day. What's your view on that? And how do you think it is helping or even hindering someone to have a healthier long-term approach to nutrition? Is there a place for it?
I don't think there's a place for the term cheat meal. I feel like there is a place for having the flexibility to be able to have a higher day occasionally and understanding how that impacts your overall approach. But again, it's just the labeling, like in what context is cheating good in any aspect of life? Like it's a negative word that kind of like has negative connotations. And as soon as you see a certain type of food as like a cheat food, that means that if you consume that food in any other context but your cheat days, that you're going to have a bad reaction typically to that food. The other thing is that when we look at like cheat meals and cheat days, is that often when it comes along with that side, like people see it as like a free for all, and they think like that essentially, like let's say their goal is fat loss or, whatever it is, that 6 good days like outweighs one bad day, but that's not how kind of fat loss works. Like it's very, very easy to consume more calories in one day than you've kind of created a deficit from the other 6 days. So it's not really good from an actual result standpoint, and it's not particularly good from a food relationship standpoint either.
Yeah, it's almost like I remember when I was going through different dieting stages as well, it was like you could either eat lower calories during the week and then have a really big calorie day on the weekend. And I found what worked best for me was keeping a bit more of an even keel over the course of the week. So it wasn't like my body was hanging out because it was so hungry, ready for this big meal. And I'd probably eat over the top of that big meal because I was restricting myself so much during the week. It actually probably caused me more mental stress than anything else. It was supposed to be something that was meant to help with adherence and everything like that. And looking back on that, I was like, that's just not a tactic that has a future in my long-term eating healthy habits. And it sounds like you're finding that with your clients too. It's making those, well, first of all, relabeling cheat meals to what they actually are, a meal, and then making sure that there's room for those included in your clients' plans already.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the things that I do with my clients, we have like a game plan call before we even start, like before I give them the plan, where we discuss their lifestyle and what, like I have some ideas that I'm like, based upon what you've told me about your lifestyle, here are some things that I think may work for you. What are your thoughts? And some people like that idea if they have social weekends and they have like, family meals or something that they do consistently on weekends. We might go, okay, cool. We're going to allow a few more calories on this day, which gives them that flexibility there. But it's obviously educated and they understand that like they still need to kind of meet some nutrient needs on those days, and that it's not a free for all, like that they can absolutely undo it. And it's more about kind of like being able to relax and have a social meal and knowing that like they have a few more kind of calories there. Other times, we have clients where it's more of a flexible approach where maybe we just work to a weekly average or a daily average, so that if things fluctuate a little bit day to day, that's okay. But we usually also kind of say that there is a bit of a cap. Like we don't really want to see 20% more or 20% less on any given day, because obviously if people start taking it to the extremes and like, having 5,000 calories on a Sunday and then trying to eat 1,000 calories every other day, that's essentially just a binge restrict cycle again. So yeah, it just depends on the client. But most of the time, like you said, getting into that routine and habits and kind of like keeping things fairly even is a good approach.
Yeah, and even hearing you say that, talking about the binge restrict cycle, what we talked like about rigidity with diets and stuff before, I'm always feeling myself physically getting stressed just even thinking about living a life like that. And I think people who are listening to this episode, they're listening to it because they're hoping to make some long-term healthier habits and have better relationships with their foods. What other evidence or what other, I guess, facts can you give someone who's looking to make this change to help reassure them that by going down this route and looking at the long-term picture and something that's sustainable, that it's the right thing to do long-term?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of touching on it before. Like a lot of the rigid approaches, I guess like we need to be honest and say that there's usually always a place for certain approaches. So I can't say that no one should never go with a rigid approach, because there is places where that is probably necessary and a smart move. For example, I have a client who has a fight on the weekend and they need to make weight by a certain weight. So we need to take a fairly structured, rigid approach, because we're looking at kind of water amounts and sodium and things like that. And there's so many details and things that could slightly put him off that would be, like not a good idea. So we go a little bit more rigid for a short period of time. After the fight, obviously that flexibility comes back. For most people though, that level of rigidity just isn't necessary. Like I was saying before, we know that basically for a lot of people, like people talk about 80-20, and I think, that can definitely work. I tend to kind of talk more about 90-10, just because it tends to get slightly better results. But like the same theory is that like, if you're eating in line with your goals most of the time, then those small bits and pieces don't really matter. And the way that I like to look at this is if like physically thinking about like, if you could see all your meals, often what happens is that people get caught up in a short timeline. They're looking at things over the course of days or a week, and they're thinking about this one meal or whatever it is. And they often get freaked out and kind of, like panic about it. They over dramatize things. If we can kind of zoom out and we look at, say, like 6 months of meals, like that one meal isn't necessarily going to make a big difference. And even, like if that happens a number of times each month, if 90% of your meals are still in line with your goals, like for the majority of people, that's probably going to get them to their goals where they need to be. The issue is that like most people, I mean, we're going to talk about this later, I'm pretty sure anyway, but most people don't know what eating in line with their goals is and are much less consistent with doing that than they realize.
I love that. And let's just go there straight away
when
it talks about goals and stuff like that. And it's really interesting. You mentioned about the 90-10, like if you're doing it 90% of the time, the 10% doesn't matter. It reminded me of, when a baby's learning to walk, they're not going to give up the first time they don't succeed. They keep trying and trying, and it's accumulation of those efforts over a long period of time that enables them to end up walking. And I mean, not that we're children, but I mean, it's the same sort of principle that applies. We're not going to remember that little small blip on the timeline because of those consistent efforts that we've done all around that. But I'd love to jump into more of those nutrition goals and how can someone set a goal around their nutrition that is more anchored in that long-term view?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess, and obviously you talk about this with clients and there's looking at kind of values of the individual and things like that, which you can talk about to a much larger degree than me. I guess for me, it's being able to identify kind of where they want to go. So understanding what their ideal looks like and then being able to reverse engineer that down to the behavior level in terms of like, these are the daily and weekly behaviors that we need to do to get you to where you want to be. And then we focus specifically on accruing reps in those behaviors and try to not so much focus on the outcome. Yeah, I think that's the basis of that, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds really simple, but in reality, that's
Correct.
Literally what it is. It's finding out, what's important to that individual and using those internal factors that aren't external. It's literally driven by yourself and it's at your core. And that's what's going to essentially support you to achieve those long-term results, but also stay motivated to achieve those long-term results. And I'd be interested to hear, how you deal with clients and motivation, personally and with my clients, especially when you're trying something new. You can have all this really good excitement around just the novelty of doing something new, but it's, after that, normally a month is okay. After like a month, life can pop up or something shiny might look more interesting. It can sort of sway someone off a goal. What are some strategies that you use with your clients to help them refocus?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think part of it is just understanding that like we can't always rely on motivation, that it's not always going to be there, and understanding that from the get-go. And I think that is part of the benefit of having a coach. In fact, I think it's probably one of the biggest benefits of having a coach is having someone to talk to about these things and then them being able to talk you through it. Because I think a lot of the time it's just those weeks, you have those tough weeks where things don't go right and you are feeling a bit down, that you need someone on the outside who's got an external viewpoint to kind of say, hey, look, like this week actually wasn't that bad. And like with a few simple things and reflecting, we can, turn this around and start to create good momentum. And I think I talk about that a lot with clients is kind of like feedback loops, in that like it's very easy to fall into like a negative feedback loop, but it's a little bit more challenging, but it's also easy to start creating momentum in a positive feedback loop. So often what happens is that something in life, as you said, comes up and might disrupt their plans, whether it's a super busy week at work, whether something happens and they go away and, their nutrition isn't the way that they expected. And that frustrates them. And then, they start feeling frustrated. And sometimes that can lead to like another poor week. And then it can kind of build from there. So the other thing then we have to look at is if we look at like the positive feedback loop, is that realistically, and I think I first heard about this from Mark Manson, and he talks about like the do something principle. So I kind of riff on that, I guess, a little bit. And if we look at that cycle, it's kind of like we've got, motivation or inspiration, action, results. Out of that kind of cycle, we can't really control motivation or inspiration. Like you can't just manifest that. We can't necessarily impact the results that we get. Like we can't control them directly either. So the only thing that we can actually directly do in that cycle is action. So we need to figure out, okay, well, what are the actions that we need to take? I think when we're struggling with motivation, or someone's not feeling it, it's about reducing the barrier to taking action, to thinking about, okay, well, how can we make this easier to do this week? Or what's something that's like achievable? And then starting to build that momentum again. Because I think, again, people with that all or nothing mindset start to think, okay, well, if I can't go for a half hour walk every single day, then I may as well sit on the couch kind of thing. I don't think I may as well sit on the couch, but that's what happens. Rather than thinking, okay, well, let's set the goal for a 10-minute walk. And if I'm feeling good and I have the time, like, cool, let's push it out. Let's go for half an hour, but let's start small. And that kind of feeds back as well into then when we're talking about habits, like I see my role as a coach is essentially when we're starting or trying to form habits, it's essentially getting enough reps of a behavior until that becomes a little bit more automatic, a little bit more default. And so like for habit formation, it's not necessarily about duration. I think frequency and reps is more important. So it's really about just keeping it going rather than kind of duration. So if that habit is daily walks, I don't care if it's a 5 or 10 minute walk around the block. Like I'd prefer that you kept to that kind of pattern and still tried to get it in rather than trying to do an hour walk and not finding the time to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it sounds like when someone's struggling to keep doing the thing, your role as a coach, you're acknowledging that, well, something is better than nothing to continue to create that habit. And so like you're saying with the walks, it's if they can't or don't have the time or just can't see themselves doing a 10-minute walk today, just get out and walk to the end of the driveway and back. They've still developed that habit of going for a walk. And so, yeah, I think you touched on a really good point there is whenever you sort of struggle with motivation, one of the greatest things that you can do is get momentum. No matter how small or seemingly small it may seem, it's that one little action, that one little step that could help sort of kickstart the momentum going again.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you touched on having a coach and how important that can be to support, I guess, that initial motivation and that habit formation. Are there any other things that you feel like someone can employ to help them create those lasting habits? Or is there anything you think that is currently holding people back from potentially creating those long-term habits?
So I guess like there's probably two key things that I think most people struggle with, probably slightly surprising when I kind of say them. Obviously, when we're talking about nutrition, there's a lot of barriers to why people don't reach their goals and don't form these habits. First and foremost, I think it's understanding that like a lot of like good habits, healthy habits, take a lot longer to form than so-called bad habits, largely just due to the rewarding nature of bad habits. You know, like most bad habits, obviously we see like a large increase in dopamine and it just means that they form really, really quickly. Good habits, unfortunately, do not have that same effect. And it takes time to start feeling good often from kind of some of these habits. But the main things that I see is environment and resource allocation, which is kind of something that I think most people, when I say this, are kind of like, what? So environment, I'll quickly cover that. But basically, environment is just that we live in an environment that pushes us away from the way that most people want to be. So, you know, being healthy, having a healthy body weight, all of those kind of things, like we live in an environment that essentially pushes us in the opposite direction in terms of it's hard to be active. We're working long hours. There's constantly calorie dense, hyper palatable foods available to us. We don't have to put any effort in there. You know, we're typically sleep deprived, overworked, things like that. So it's really, really hard from the get-go. And there's only so much control that we can have on environment. We can't really control the larger environment. We can control like micro environment. And that's something that maybe we can touch on after. The second thing, as I said, is resource allocation. And this is it forms a large foundation of my practice and how I work with clients. But the general concept is that we have limited resources day to day. So time, money, energy, effort that we can invest in health behaviors, let's say. There's also so many different health behaviors potential health behaviors that people could invest those things in. So like if you think of like, if you went to a supermarket, but it was health behaviors that you're looking to buy, and there's all these different kind of products and options there that you can look at. But you've also then got marketers and people on social media who are standing in the aisles and they're shouting and telling about, you know, this is the best thing that you should do and this is going to help you drop all this weight and things like that. So you've got all this information, all these potential avenues that you can invest in, plus an abundance of information that's hard to know who's telling the truth and who's not. So basically what that leads to is that we don't have clarity in the behaviors that provide the most return on investment. And so then what happens is that most people end up investing their resources in the stuff that doesn't really matter or that doesn't provide much return, so to speak. So they're doing things thinking that they're going to be getting a large return, that they're going to be achieving their goals and investing a lot of effort in that. that may not actually provide a lot of juice for their squeeze, so to speak. And when that happens, and I see this all the time, is that frustration builds. As you were saying, like 4 weeks in, they might see some initial results, but then things slow down quickly and frustration starts to build because they're investing effort. They're putting in time, they're putting in energy. I'm not like most people, when they try these things, are trying pretty hard, but they're not getting the results. And it's kind of like going to a job each day that you don't necessarily love, putting in the effort and then not getting paid. Like you would never stick with that job for a particularly long time. So eventually they quit. And the cycle begins again when they get that motivation or inspiration or something shiny, like you said, stands out to them and they start that cycle again. So realistically, at the end of the day, it's about having clarity in what are the big things that people need to be doing. And then, as I said, we understand, okay, well, this is what we need to be doing. How do we do that? How do we make your lifestyle, like how do we fit your lifestyle? How do we create a diet or a nutrition plan? Or how do we help you tick these boxes daily, weekly to get you to that goal?
Yeah, and I think you covered such great topics in environments and resource allocation. I'd love to dig into both of those in a little bit more detail. Like I know with environment, the most effective and probably immediate way to create change is to change your environment. And I'm sure you'll agree that someone doesn't have to go to a health retreat in Byron Bay to eat healthy. They can do stuff within their environment to create that environment for themselves to develop those behaviors. And I'd love to hear you speak more about those micro environments that you were speaking about just before.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I 100% agree. And I think over the years, more and more I realize just how important environment is. And like, not even just from health, I think from so many areas, it's crazy to understand, like, even like, I don't want to go down that road, but like drug abuse and things like that, like obviously it plays a really important role there, crime, things like that. But specifically with nutrition, at the end of the day, and you would have probably read James Clear, Atomic Habits and stuff like that. And he has a really good quote. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something about like our environment shaping the habits that we do each day. And it's really, really true, is that so much of our daily routines and our daily behaviors and habits are shaped by the environment around us. And most of the time, because we're not aware of this and we never really learn how to create an environment that helps us, we just form these routines and we never really think about them that don't necessarily serve us well. So in terms of what we can control, at the end of the day, my big thing is trying to make healthy options, healthy decisions as easy as possible. So we're trying to reduce friction to those decisions, to those behaviors, and then vice versa for maybe behaviors that you want to reduce and things like that. So one thing that I'm really big on with clients is planning in terms of like weekly meal planning. And one of the biggest reasons is because that's a very easy way to change your environment. If we have a set of targets that we're trying to meet each week, let's say we're, trying to hit a certain amount of fruit, a certain amount of vegetables, we're trying to get protein with most meals, those kind of things. If you're winging it day to day, the likelihood of you doing that, like you might still do well, but like it's reduced. If you sit down and you have a plan and then you create a food shop based upon that plan and all that food is then in the fridge and it's ready to go, and maybe you have some convenient options there for emergencies and stuff like that. In my experience, that drastically increases the likelihood of you hitting all of those other targets that we've talked about setting. So it's almost like that first domino towards nailing all the rest of the other behaviors during the week. So like we might call that like a high return on investment behavior or a high impact behavior because it has such a drastic effect on the rest of your week as well. In terms of like so that's reducing friction there. And it could be, having frozen vegetables, frozen fruits. It could be having ready to go protein options. It can be outsourcing meals for certain individuals who are super busy. It can be knowing what fast food options might actually be okay, like reasonable choices for you and your goals, understanding, okay, which options on Uber Eats actually have some vegetables and protein and, are valid options on a Friday night for when I can't be, fucked to cook or anything like that. That's all about kind of having some control over the environment and being able to shape that in the direction that you want to go and things like that. And then in terms of the other direction, increasing friction to things that we maybe want to do less. I probably don't focus on this as much with clients, but as you were saying way earlier in the podcast about, forbidding, like having forbidden foods and that making you think about foods. I don't think that's a good idea, but I do think that it can be good to create an environment that perhaps adds friction to consuming those foods. So we're not saying you can't have it. We're just creating an environment that doesn't provide prompts and cues for those foods. So we don't have certain foods at eye level in the pantry so that when you go into the pantry, it's looking at you straight in the face. Maybe if you've got like a freezer, we're putting certain things deeper in the freezer so you can't see it and it takes a little bit more effort to get it. Or maybe, and this is probably my favorite, like if ice cream was a problem for a client, we probably advise you maybe not to have ice cream in the freezer, but I would prefer that you go to like Messina and get ice cream there and maybe go with like your partner or your family or something like that. So then we're kind of looking after that psychological, the social, and kind of the physiological, because you're less likely to just grab a tub. Like if you go to Messina, you're probably not going to go back and order another serve after getting it once. They're going to control the serving size, so it kind of controls that side of it as well.
Listening to you hear all of that about just what you can do for your environment, it doesn't sound restrictive at all. Like it sounds like it's actually something that is really enabling and empowering. If you have a strong plan, and you're not here saying you can't eat Uber Eats and you can't eat frozen foods, which I know there are some connotations around all that. It's like ideal is obviously fresh foods where you can, but understanding that, you know, life is not just about plan A, it's plan B, C, and hopefully we don't always end up at Z, but that's just the reality of the human experience. And so hearing you say that there's all these other options out there that will still enable you to achieve your goal actually feels really empowering. And I think that's something to take note of for people listening on this is healthy eating doesn't need to look restrictive, and it doesn't need to be something that's really negative and limiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just quickly on that as well, like one of the things I just did a presentation to clients talking about this, but I think often in these situations, like I hear it and I see it a lot, people come back to me and they're like, oh, I need more willpower, I need more discipline and things like that when they have these lapses or discrepancies, whatever you want to call them. And most of the time in that situation, I would say it's probably better to focus on environment rather than those things, because there's some really interesting research where they look at individuals who have been successful in a certain metric. It might be study with university clients or something along those lines. And they looked at, you know, were the people that were getting the best results in tests, exams, and other things, the individuals who were the most disciplined or kind of had the most willpower and things like that. So basically what they did, these people had like, I think it was just like blackberries or something. And throughout the day, they'd get prompted to ask, had they been tempted by anything, whether it's distractions, food, things like that? Had they given in, basically, and stuff like that? What they actually found was that it wasn't the people that were most disciplined that got the best results. It was the people who reported the least amount of temptations and prompts in their environment. And so we can look at that and we can go, okay, well, rather than necessarily trying to have this magical willpower for when you get home at 3 p.m. and there's the biscuits in the cupboard or whatever it might be, what you're doing there is you've already had the cue. There's already the temptation there. So the fire's already lit in your head. Trying to put out that fire is always going to be harder than not letting the fire start in the first place. So if that cue doesn't come up, then we don't have that kind of, you know, that reaction and we're not tempted to eat it.
That's incredible. I've got nothing to add to that because I think that speaks wonders for itself. I think that's such a really valuable chunk of knowledge to know is it's way easier to stop something from happening than trying to stop something that's already in motion and trying to put the brakes on it. So yeah, it sounds like making sure that your environment takes into account all the different scenarios that are likely to come up in your personal day-to-day and just making sure that your environment supports whatever that could look like.
Yeah, 100%.
And so the second one you touched on also was resources. And I've worked in marketing, so I've definitely been on the other end of, hey, I need consumers to buy something. And I've put all my best efforts to make sure that happens. And so I would love to hear from your point of view, what are some, and I don't mean for you to say like, this is right or this is wrong. I know you won't do that anyway, but what are some resources that could be high ROI for someone to invest in?
Yeah, cool. So the way that kind of I look at this is essentially, again, there's a really good quote. I can't remember. I think it's like Ralph Waldo Emerson, something weird like that. But I don't know it exactly. But he talks about, you know, the principles are few, but the methods are many, and that the individual who understands the principles can shape the methods basically to suit their needs. And I apply this. I try and figure this out for anything that I'm trying to do or learn, because I think it applies pretty broadly to most things. Nutrition is the same, is that with nutrition, there's very few non-negotiables when it comes to having a healthy diet for your goals. There's like a few key things that we absolutely need to do. And then how we do those things is very, very flexible, which is great news because it allows us to kind of, you know, chop and change and make things fit to people's needs. The problem is obviously understanding those principles and how they work, and then like everyone else having their methods that they try and sell people on. But the way that we kind of look at this is that if you were to look at a lot of the fad diets, a lot of the popular diets around, one of the things that all of the people that, supporters of these diets, they all believe that that diet is the best diet, that that's the diet that most people should be following in order to achieve their goals. If we went around and we went to say like their annual, catch up or something like that, where all these supporters went to, you would probably find people that were healthy, that, were a good body weight, that were thriving, following that diet style. But if we think about it, we know, okay, well, there is one diet that says you have to eat high carb, low fat, blah, blah, blah. There's another diet that says exactly the opposite thing. And there's all of these contradictions within diets. And if we can find, and we can, that there are people that are thriving on each of these different diets, then what we can say is that it's not necessarily the factors that they're saying is driving results that's actually driving results. So what we can start to look at is, what are the common factors among healthy diets? What are the key things that all diets are doing that help people? And then we can focus on those things and figure out how can we do those things more consistently. So when I was looking through this and looking at those kind of connections, there's a few key things that kind of came about, and they kind of line up with the literature on kind of what's a healthy diet as well. Basically, the key things that kind of come up are the majority of the diet should come from minimally processed whole foods. So 99% of diets that lead to someone improving their health do that. They shift the diet away from ultra processed foods to more whole foods, minimally processed. And that has a ton of different benefits that like we could go into if we wanted to at some point. The second thing is that they do help people regulate their energy intake. So we're talking about calories, kilojoules, all those kind of things. When you shift a diet towards more whole foods and minimally processed, that naturally tends to happen. But it also tends to happen with other diets. If they cut out certain food groups, if they restrict eating windows, whatever they do, if a diet leads to weight loss or fat loss, it's helping someone regulate their energy intake in some way or another. So that's the second big principle that they do. Most healthy diets also tend to increase the percentage of protein that is coming within the diet. Even sometimes, and this is a little bit backwards, but sometimes with, say, more plant-based diets, often because when you shift to a plant-based diet, the total percentage of energy reduces, the percentage of protein increases a little bit. And if you're following a plant-based diet properly, you're thinking about protein a whole lot more as well, because you know that it can be a little bit more challenging to get enough. So those people that are doing it properly and seeing the benefits are typically eating an appropriate amount of protein. So those are probably like the big three things that we can kind of say are in common among diets. And that's generally where we start in terms of the high ROI principles. And then there's other bits and pieces that come into that, such as, like I said, meal planning. And then there's movement, there's sleep and stress management and stuff like that as well.
And so it's so great to hear that there's so many options for a healthy diet. And so if someone were to say, well, James, which diet should I follow? How would you answer that question? Or what other questions would you potentially ask someone to help guide them to, I guess, a way of eating that is going to be sustainable and healthy for them long term?
Yeah. So I guess realistically, at the end of the day, we think about, okay, so we need to get most of your diet, like we need to eat enough plant foods, we need to get mostly minimally processed foods. What's going to make that as easy as possible for you? You know what I mean? Like, does that mean having a smoothie in the morning and we jam that with, plenty of fruits and vegetables to help you kick off on your way and things like that? What's going to help you regulate your energy intake? How can we make that as easy as possible for you while also still meeting goal number one? And then the same thing with protein. So we basically just have a think about what's going to make this as easy as possible, not what, someone on social media said our ancestors were doing or anything like that. It's about how can we tick these boxes and make it as easy as possible? Because when we look at it that way, adherence improves, people are able to do it more consistently, and that's where we see good results. And that's, like, in a nutshell, what I do with individuals. The analogy that I kind of use for this is that when most people that I talk to, or when I'm coming to them, they're kind of approaching their diet like, those baby toys where there's the blocks that are certain shapes, and then there's the ball or the block with the holes that are the same shapes, and they have to meet the same block with the same hole. Most people are essentially approaching their nutrition and diet and they're trying to jam a triangle into a circle hole because that's what someone has told them is the best way to do something, or that's a diet that's worked for someone else. And what we need to realize with those diets is that they probably do work for like a small percentage of people. But when you're a fad diet and millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people are trying it, that small percentage can quickly add up to a lot of testimonials. You know what I mean? A lot of people saying, yeah, this worked for me. But still, the vast majority of people, it's probably not the best approach for them. What we do, or essentially what I do, and what I advocate, is that we learn about your lifestyle, your needs, your personal preferences when it comes to food, and we shape the diet around that rather than vice versa.
Yeah, so it sounds like, because when there's so many options that someone can choose from, it's like not going, hey, Bob down the road suggests I should go paleo because it's the latest thing and he's 50 and he's shredded. It's going, actually, now we can incorporate things like, what's your enjoyment? What are your meal preferences? Or, do you want to eat plant-based once or twice a week? You can start incorporating those little things when there's lots of different options to get somewhere. So again, it's just another way. What it sounds like is that healthy eating, again, doesn't have to be restricted and something that isn't unpleasant. There's actually a lot of flexibility and room for enjoyment throughout the whole process. And I think that's what's key for something to be long-term, is you have to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like referring back to it as well, like you were saying, the opposite of that restriction is flexible. And at the end of the day, if someone wants to go paleo or someone they enjoy that style of eating, I'm cool with that. That's absolutely fine. What I always suggest, though, is that they have a flexible approach with that method so that they're able to have, dairy or legumes or whatever it is that their diet that they follow doesn't usually include, on the odd chance that they go out to a restaurant or they go to a birthday party or whatever it is, that they're able to still take part in that. Because again, it's not going to ruin everything. They're not going to, suddenly gain all their weight back or anything like that. It's not going to suddenly lead to ill health. They're going to be fine. But that restriction of not being able to do that can obviously cause issues either then or further on.
Yeah, and you touched on a good point there as well. It's not only, having a framework to follow, it's the education around that framework as well. I think it's really common for people to want to follow something just because someone's told them to, or go, here's the plan. But I think that next level is actually developing the education around it so you can be even more flexible with it. So if you go to a restaurant and you go, I can't quite eat 100% paleo, but I know what it looks like and I know the principles of it. So what choices can I make here that align with those? So I think education, once I believe, and I've done this previously with training programs, for example, is I might follow a training program without knowing the specifics of it. But once I start to embody it, then I start to get more curious as to how is this all pieced together to create the experience that I'm ultimately getting through this. And I'd say that's the same for your nutrition clients as well.
Yeah, 100%. Training is a great example. Like if you understand the principles of what, adaptations and what you're trying to achieve in the gym, the exercises that you're doing don't necessarily, they're not set in stone. You're able to kind of change those based upon what maybe suits your body a little bit better and still get the same adaptions.
Yeah, 100%. And so I'd love to hear from you as well. If someone's listening to this going, this all sounds great, I'm feeling a little bit stuck at the moment. What's a piece of advice or a suggestion you could give someone to help move through that initial feeling of being stuck to make some progress towards this goal?
Hire a coach.
Hire a coach.
Yeah.
I know a good one. I'll leave his details in the notes below.
In all honesty, though, if I could afford it, I'd probably have a coach in every aspect of my life for that clarity that it brings and for the reduction in the learning curve. As you were just talking about, education, if you can educate yourself, sure, there's a lot of information out there and it is probably going to take a really long time. Having someone who's been there and is knowledgeable and can kind of explain things through it can drastically shorten that learning curve and provide clarity in terms of what you need to do now and what you're going to need to do throughout that journey to get you to where you want to be. In terms of actionable advice, I think probably starting with that first high ROI principle of looking at the percentage of your diet that's coming from kind of more ultra processed foods and trying to shift that towards more minimally processed whole foods, mainly because it does have such a large impact on a vast array of different things in terms of helping you feel satiated, increasing the nutrient density of your diet, gut health, fiber intake, any number of things. It's just so broad ranging that it's kind of it's going to cover a lot of bases. And if you're doing that, you're in a pretty good position.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying around it doesn't have to be you go out there and spend thousands of dollars on a coach. That's not the only way to make progress. And I agree with you. I'm an advocate for a coach. I think what I teach is that success is like the success leaves clues. And so if you hire someone who has walked your path before, it makes your journey a lot easier because you have someone who's been onto the battlefield with you and can support you every step of the way. And so I definitely would encourage people to look at that too. And while people are sitting there Googling a coach, as I said, I'll leave details, a really good one in the show notes as well. There are some things that people can do in the meantime. And so when you mentioned the looking more on the whole foods, moving away from the processed foods, what's a really actionable step that someone can do in the next 24 to 48 hours to make some really great progress towards that?
I would probably just keep a food journal for a couple of days, maybe like a 3-day food journal or something like that. Then have a look over it and maybe with a highlighter, just kind of go over and note, okay, well, you could either highlight like more ultra processed foods or more whole foods. Obviously, you would have to understand that. So basically, in very simple terms, ultra processed foods are foods that are like very far removed from their natural state, and they remove a lot of the nutrients, vitamins, minerals. They tend to add salt, sugar, fat, and things like that to make it more palatable and things like that. So when we're talking about minimally processed to whole foods, we're really talking about foods that are close to their natural states: fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, nuts, seeds, whole grains, things like that. So kind of just having a look at your diet from that front and kind of highlighting things that are either the processed or the non-processed options. And then just thinking about, seeing, okay, well, what's one thing that I can kind of change this week, whether that's swapping out something that's more processed for something that's less processed or something along those lines. I think that would be a good start.
Excellent. I've already got my little homework task written out. I think even if you feel confident in your nutrition, it's always worth evaluating, doing a self-assessment, and using that tool is a really great step as well. So I know I need to check in on that. I think I had one of those weekends where I was like, did I actually eat a vegetable on Sunday? So I definitely think no matter where you're at in your stage of your nutrition journey, that's a really valuable exercise.
It's also kind of just when you're looking at the more ultra processed options, it's also reflecting on, I guess, how they were eaten and the situation in which they were eaten in. So like I was saying, there's a difference between going out and getting gelato messina or something like that and mindlessly eating shapes on your couch at home kind of thing, because one's obviously offering a lot more than the other in terms of like health, social, psychological things like that. And that's important to consider. And then thinking about, like it's kind of trying to change that and going, okay, well, if I am going to have a food that is potentially a little bit higher in calories and a little bit lower in nutrients, maybe I want to try and make this slightly more special. I think that's something that's changed again in our environment and society over time, is that like we've moved away from meals out and those kind of options being something that's kind of special towards something that's every day, and because we haven't been prepared or because it's the easy option and things like that.
I'm so glad you added that in, because I think that's something, you're right. It can be so easy to just think of meals as just something that you do go, oh, I need to eat, or you see it as fuel, and it can be seen as both of those things. And I also think there's such value from seeing it as an experience. And it's just, if you look at, you're eating through any of those filters, you have just a different experience through each of them. And so you can really control what sort of experience you wish to have. So thank you very much for highlighting that, because I think a really common viewpoint of food is it's fuel or just something I have to do. It actually can be really a positive and beautiful experience as well.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much, James, for taking the time to share all of your wisdom with us. If someone is interested in hearing more about what it is that you do, or would love to check you out and find out how they can work with you, where's the best place for them to check you out?
At the moment, probably Instagram. Hopefully, if there's any older clients, they're still on Instagram. But yeah, J Kuhn Nutrition. You'll find me on there. I don't want to brag, but I put a lot of information out on social media. It's a focus of mine, and I don't really hold back. I try and put out as much information and as much value as I can there. So check that out, because I'm sure there's things that you can learn and get a better understanding of my concepts, how I work with clients and things like that. There's also a website, which is www.jameskuhnnutritionandfitness.com, but you could get there from Instagram as well. Both have more information on coaching and further information.
Perfect. And I will advocate for your Instagram content. That was a very humble brag. Your content is awesome, and I always appreciate just how much value you put out. So thank you very much for that. And thank you again for spending this time with me and with the listeners. I look forward to seeing what results people get from the advice and support you've shared on this podcast today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me. I love talking about this stuff. So always happy to have a chat with anyone. If people reach out on social media, I'll have a chat with them too.
Sounds great. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, James.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of the Actually You Can podcast. I so enjoy having you here, and I hope you've taken away powerful insights and tools that will support you to achieve your high-level results. Now, before you go apply all this wisdom in your life, I would be so grateful if you are able to leave us a podcast review on the platform that you're listening to, or share this episode with a friend. Your support means that we can help more self-led, high-performing individuals just like you expand what's possible for them. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so please go on and shoot me a note on socials and let me know what you think. You can find me on Instagram as Miff Galloway. Now, go and make those dreams a reality, because actually, you can. Speak to you soon.